What's going on, guys? JC Nita here, back with another video. And I have a really quick favor to ask you. If this is your second or more time tuning in to watch one of my videos, please feel free to smash the like button. And if you feel so too inclined, subscribe because it really does help with the YouTube algorithm and I would greatly appreciate it. And with that being said, let's hop into the video. Today, we're talking about why so many young adults are still living with their parents in the US. And I can speak to this very personally because I'm one of these young adults. I'm not sure if I'm a young adult anymore, who still lives at home with their parents because I moved back to save money for a house, which I said in other videos. So let's see if anything to talk about here applies to my situation. And let's see what's going on.
About 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents. And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend isn't new.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save, but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy. 27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
I saw all of the money that I was saving, and I thought, maybe I should stay home for a little bit, and I didn't feel an urgency to move out.
Not everyone is enthusiastic.
Okay, so I will say this. She did seem a bit enthusiastic, so I'm happy about that. Good. Listen, I have a good relationship with my parents as well, so me living at home is not really a problem. I help them, they help me. I do help out and pay around the house though, because I don't like the thought of just staying at home and not paying any type of money at all. So I help out with bills, help out when things break. And so I do my fair share. I don't pay as much as I would be if I was renting, of course, because then that would defeat the purpose. But I do pay a good amount of money. And so it's a symbiotic relationship, is mutually beneficial. She seems as though she's like, okay, I'm saving all this money at home. Let me just kick back on the couch with my mom. Now, I'm not saying she's not being lazy, but and I've had to see more, but I don't like the idea of taking advantage of your parents' kindness. I think that you should use it as an opportunity to get yourself ahead financially, pay off all your debt, which is what I did. I paid off all my student loan debt. I paid off my car note. I was living in a house before, and I moved out of that house and rented that out. And I also paid off a loan that I took out to help renovate that house. So I paid off all my debt, and I've been saving up money to now buy a house for myself. And whenever my parents need something, they have it because they looked out for me. I'll do the same for them. So let's see what else is going on here.
About this trend.
You guys are making 6 figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money. Oh, yeah.
36% of Americans said in a 2022 survey that more young adults living with their parents is bad for society. So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the U.S. economy.
Look at that house. I hope it's not just her mom in there, because that makes sense like she's living back at home. Because why does her mom have, or her parents even have that big old house and it's just them two in there? That's a lot.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old, and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated from the University of Miami in 2019 and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
Right after I saw the cost of living and things like that after I graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
I ended up bartending and waitressing until October, where I got my first offer, so it did take a little bit longer than I expected. Currently live at the Jersey Shore, and I was commuting into New York City, which takes about 2 hours each way. And I thought, in 6 months or so, I'll move into the city, be closer to the job, and the pandemic threw a wrench in those plans.
Victoria now works a fully remote job, which she says she probably wouldn't have if it weren't for the pandemic. Without a commute to worry about, she was able to stay at her mom's for longer.
It's a lot harder for young people today to save up for, markers of the American dream than it was for previous generations. Part of the reason we see this escalation.
Before she goes any further, I will say that I misjudged a little bit. She moved in after she lost her job, and she was working as a waitress. Oh no, she said a bartender or something else. So she wasn't working in her career yet until I think she said October, whenever this came out. I'm not sure, not too long ago. So she's just starting now working in her career. But that commute, she was commuting 2 hours to and fro. That means 4 hours a day. I would never do that. That's literally a waste of your life. So the pandemic for her was most definitely a silver lining.
of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks. And so, for example, like they suffered a layoff or they suffer some sort of health shock or they got in a car accident, they didn't have any additional credit to weather that shock. They would end up moving back home. The financial stability of young adults, their ability to pay for things if they got into an emergency, was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings. This can have ramifications for setting up a financial future.
I feel like there's something that's not unique to millennials or Gen Z. I think every generation has a struggle when they're younger and they're just making it out after they graduate college or what have you. I think that things are more expensive for, I'm a millennial, so things are more expensive for us now maybe than it was in the past. But I've seen videos of people from the 70s talking about how expensive their home was and their home cost like $70,000. So I think it's all relative. But I mean, things are a little pricey now. What I will say though is even in the beginning, it said a lot of Gen Z say that they don't have enough money to live the lifestyle they want to live. Social media, social media. Again, I think that before maybe older generations, maybe they didn't live with their parents, and yes, they could afford a home, cookie cutter homes that were built up after World War II or what have you. If we're talking about boomers, Gen X, I'm not sure what Gen X was doing, but for Gen Z and millennials, we have this idea of a lifestyle we want, and we want it fast. And the lifestyle we see a lot of times, number one, fake, and number two, it's something that you get as you get older, not when you just graduate college. So get off of Instagram and go, struggle like a lot of people did. Because I'm sure back in the day, a lot of people, they graduated, they had roommates. They lived with 3 or 4 people, especially if you're talking about living on the coast like California or New York. So, I mean, this is just an alternative to that. Instead of having a roommate and paying $500 for part of the apartment that you rent with 4 other people, instead you move back home. So, I mean, every generation has their way of making it work when they're first starting out.
Roughly 1 in 4 Gen Z adults say housing costs are one of the biggest challenges to financial success.
The prices of homes has escalated over the last few decades much faster than actual incomes. So it is actually much harder for a millennial or a Gen Z to save up for a down payment to buy a home. And that's something that bears out in the data.
The pandemic did have a lot to do with it. I saw how much I was saving and I was like, maybe I shouldn't be paying, upwards of $3,000 a month and making somebody else richer when I could stay at home, save that money, and spend it on where I want to spend it. Between my job and my bartending and waitressing, I make anywhere from $85,000 to $95,000 a year. I would say about 40 to 50% of my salary is going right into savings. My mentality is why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to own? And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a house.
Young adults ages 25 to 34 in high
Okay, not bad. I will say that there's always an argument to be made about renting. A lot of times renting makes more sense than buying. Now, I'm in the same situation she's in, living at home, stacking up money to put a down payment on a house. Makes sense. And they say, oh, I'd rather not give my money to somebody else when I'm paying rent. Oh yeah? Take a look at the amortization table for your mortgage and see how much interest you're paying to your lender. Take a look at it. Let's say you buy a house $375,000 and you get a 30-year mortgage, and with interest rates where they're at right now at about 7%, and you pay that minimum monthly mortgage payment every month. By the time you're done paying that mortgage after 30 years, you're going to have paid more interest than you did for the principal of that property. You pay $375, the down payment that you put, plus the money you pay in principal each month with your mortgage, and you're going to pay another $450,000 in interest on top of it. So unless you sell your house 30 years down the line and you sell it for $800,000, you're not going to break even. You're going to lose money. So are you really winning by buying in that scenario? Not really. So you have to do it smart. That's why I said, for me personally, I'm going to rent a room out with the money I get from that room, help pay extra towards the mortgage each month. And with the money that I normally put towards savings, take part of that and put at least the extra however much per month towards that mortgage so that I make sure I pay as least in interest as humanly possible. Just something to keep in mind. This is coming from someone who owns property, someone who is in the process of buying another property to live in. So I'm very up on this information. So check it out. Just take a look at the amortization schedule. Go to NerdWallet, go to Bankrate, type in the data, or go to a lender's website, type in the data under their projected mortgage estimator, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
in high cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly 26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022, while the median value of a home in the region was around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably 10 to 15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible. My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something to her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria brought up some conflict with her aunt a few times.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. Like, we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
You have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport your first time.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money. Oh, yeah. No.
I see both sides of the story here. Honestly speaking, listen, as a resident millennial here, and I'm sure many of you watching are millennials, let me know what you think in the comments section, and Gen Z, and anyone really, is that cost of education for us and housing prices have outpaced our earning. Yes, we make more money than maybe our predecessors did when they first graduated school. But the two big staples, or I should say the big staple, which is housing, is astronomically more expensive than it was when, Generation X and boomers graduated. So that is the key here. If it wasn't for the cost of living, I would say that it's pretty much equal. But her aunt has a point. She just can't afford to live where she wants to live. Maybe not in Shreveport, New Jersey, where the median house price is $633,000. It's just not going to cut it. You might have to move. New Jersey, New York, if you're in California, if you're in parts of Texas now, if you're in parts of Florida, anywhere on the coast, it's going to take you a little bit longer. So her aunt has a point there too. You might just have to go live somewhere else. But at the same time, she's living at home with the mom. Hopefully she's helping her mom out a little bit or somewhat, and her boyfriend who's also living there. And so they can do both. They can save for the home they want in the location they want, and also help the mom out as well.
No, don't you want it? What was my first house? 250, maybe 270?
That doesn't exist anymore. Where am I finding a $270,000 house?
I'm not making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
In 1995, $70,000 was the equivalent of $145,000 today.
Yeah, look at that. See?
We do also have a situation that what is really good for an individual person or an individual family is not necessarily good for the entire macroeconomy.
The Federal Reserve estimates in a 2019 paper that young adults who move out of their parents' house would spend around $13,000 more per year on things such as housing, food, and transportation.
One of the big boosts to consumer spending is when people form households. Whether you're a renter or a buyer, you need to furnish that house. You need to fix things up in the home to make it livable. You end up spending a lot of money during that time. So if the pace of household formation slows down, then that's going to slow down the pace of consumer spending, and that will produce a drag on the economy.
Another issue is that there aren't enough affordable properties in popular areas for younger people who are in entry-level jobs and making less money.
Any sort of housing policy needs to be multi-pronged. Are there homes that are at the price point of these prospective home buyers? And what can we do to increase the housing supply? What can we do to build? What can we do to help elder Americans, to help them downsize and move into more right-sized homes that will open up larger homes for young families? So I think one alone is not really going to do it. We've got to look both at demand as well as supply.
The other major factor here is how much student loan debt young Americans have. 59% of U.S. adults say they've delayed financial milestones because of their student debt.
I do have a student loan payment. It's about $480 a month. So that's my largest expense.
The liability could be worse for Black borrowers, who tend to have higher than average student loan debt and less wealth than white counterparts. Black and Hispanic respondents were more likely to say that debt was holding them back from reaching financial milestones. Less than half of white respondents said the same. The amount of debt young adults held also rose substantially between 2005 and 2014, during that period of strong escalation in that cohort living with their parents.
Aggregate student loans are such an enormous part of the economy now, and that's not a reflection of younger people.
Okay, so that tracks. So they said that living at home with your parents as a young adult boomed between 2005 and 2015, I think they said, which tracks what they said with the increase in expenses of student loans, or I should say higher education, which then leads to student loans. So it makes sense. And that's another big thing is housing prices. As they said, when you adjust for inflation, the amount we're making right now compared to what Generation Z or Generation X and boomers made is a lot lower, adjusted for inflation, relative to what houses cost. And so you also have the other issue, which is that the cost of education is now much more expensive, adjusted for inflation, than it was for our counterparts. So it's a double whammy there. So that's what that's showing. So those are two major things that are driving this big this big trend in young adults living with their parents for longer. So let's let the video play out and see what they're going to finish off with here.
Making bad choices with your education, it's really a consequence in large part due to the fact that there's less public funding and going to college just is more expensive, which makes it even harder for even those college grads who are hoping to earning more money as a result of their college degrees.
Student loan debt by itself can't explain the phenomenon, especially considering so many European countries with much less student loan debt have higher rates of young adults living with their parents. 24 out of 29 European countries had more 18 to 34-year-olds living with their parents in 2021 than the US. It was over 70% in Italy, Portugal, Greece, Serbia, and Croatia.
My boyfriend is Brazilian, and multi-generational homes are very common in almost everywhere else in the world, except in the United States. So I'm just taking a page of their playbook.
The Americans are probably the only people that they're not multi-generations in one house. And I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think it's kind of nice. Why do we have to be so cold to push everybody out?
You know, there are a lot of cultures out there in which it is normal to live with your parents until you get married. And I don't think there's necessarily an economic explanation for that.
The Franklins would say in the US, it is the economy. But Victoria's mom is kind of okay with it.
Unfortunately, it is the economy and the world that we live in that just doesn't allow them to go live a comfortable life. So with them living here was no big deal. It's not really a problem. They're saving their money. Eventually they'll buy a house, and that works.
Okay. So yeah, like I said, my family is from multi-generational household is very common as well. And like she said, in a lot of countries is that way. And even those European countries they named, especially those European countries that they specifically highlighted, Croatia, Italy, for Greece, it's very common to have multi-generational households. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's bad at all. Because then you also solve for the problem of how do you take care of elderly people? Because we have an issue in the US with elder care. And a big part of that is because we're so individualistic in the US, we don't really look out for our elderly. And so they're left to depend on the government or their retirement savings or 401k, which a lot of times doesn't cover it. Whereas in a lot of countries, elderly are looked out for by the younger generation. So I think that it solves for that problem. It solves for the problem of younger people that haven't yet established themselves. So it's like both sides win. It's very, very US thing to, you have a family of 5 and they all live in different houses. And some people live in different houses and they're 5 minutes away from each other. It's like, well, I have friends personally who it's 2 brothers. They're both my friends and they have kids, or one has kids now. He has 2 kids. And it's their mother, their father, both the brothers, and one of the brothers' wives, daughter, and son. And the other brother is soon going to have a kid as well and bring his wife over. And they're all going to live in the same household. And they've just been expanding the house over time. So it's not like they're all cramped in one house. They've built onto it over time. And if they need to buy a new or a bigger one, they will. But the idea is they're spreading costs. It's economies of scale. So, and actually, I know another family, again, foreigners, and they are brothers, and the mom lives with one of them, and their kids live there, or maybe an uncle, I forget, but they're very communal. They share cars, things like that. So I think that's another way to go. I think it's going to start happening by default, as you see, as things start to get more expensive and the cost of living continues to rise and wages don't keep up. And so it's just going to be something that we see more often. And, some people, unfortunately, don't have any good relationships with their families, or they come from broken homes. So it's not always a solution that can be had for some people. But if it is a solution, I don't see anything wrong with it. Like I said, I'm taking advantage of it myself, helping my parents out, they're helping me out. Eventually, I will buy my own place. And when I do, I'm going to rent it out until I find someone and start a family then, and we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll buy a bigger house and live there with my family. So who knows? But the point is, just take away from this video, two biggest things that are making it more difficult for young people to go out on their own and have to live at home with their parents is the increased cost of home ownership, the increased cost of education, and wages not keeping up with either one. And this is driving us to where we're at now. But with that being said, if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. If you got any type of enjoyment from the video, feel free to give it a like and thumbs up, and subscribe if you feel so inclined, because I really appreciate it and it'll help with the YouTube algorithm. And with that being said, make smart financial decisions.